And we started chapter 10, and we'll start from the beginning of number 1 again, just of Aleph again, just so it's all clear, since we didn't get too far. Aleph, mitzvahs tefillin, here gam kein mitzvah yikara ma'od. The mitzvah tefillin is also, we're saying also because we were speaking about how special the mitzvah tzitzis were in the last chapter. There's also a very precious mitzvah. Why is it so precious? Shekol ha-Torah hukshel tefillin. The entire Torah is compared to tefillin. How do we see that? How is the entire Torah compared? Shnemar, as it says in the Torah, Leman tiyeh Torahs Hashem b'ficha. It says that one of the verses that tells us about putting on tefillin, right afterwards it says, in order that the Torah of Hashem should be in your mouth. So somehow, and many bar mitzvah boys speak about this on the day of their bar mitzvah, how when we wear tefillin, it's like we're connecting to the entire Torah. Now, Misha ain't menech tefillin. Now, someone who doesn't put on tefillin, this is where we sort of ended up last week, because we're having a discussion about this. Most people don't put on tefillin today regularly is because they don't know. They weren't educated. It wasn't part of their upbringing. Or whatever, they got distracted by life. Very few people, if anyone, deliberately don't wear tefillin in order to rebel against Hashem. But when this was written, people were, Jewish communities were generally more observant and people were more involved. So someone who doesn't put on tefillin, again, we're not talking about someone who doesn't put on because of ignorance or because he wasn't educated, wasn't part of his upbringing, or someone who deliberately does not put on tefillin to defy what Hashem wants. This person is considered someone who rebels against Hashem with his body. He's using his body to rebel against Hashem. And someone who wears tefillin every day even, but they're apostle, they're no good, there's something wrong with them. It's not only that he doesn't fulfill the mitzvah, he's not doing the mitzvah because there's something wrong, but it's not only he's not doing something good, there's an additional problem. What's the additional problem? He makes many blessings for no reason, because every day he's saying 1 or 2 blessings depending on his custom to put on tefillin, and they weren't kosher tefillin. So these blessings are saying Hashem's name in vain, and this is a big problem. So since it can be problematic if the tefillin aren't good, therefore, you have to be very particular to purchase tefillin from an expert sofer. Not only is he an expert, but he's a Yireh Shamayim. Now, there's not really a proper translation for the term Yireh Shamayim in English. People sort of translate the words as fear of heaven, but it's not really what it means. What it means is like someone is for real. They're totally genuine. So when we say that the sofer is Yireh Shamayim, it's not just a business for him. He really cares about it. Something that he puts his heart and soul into. And not only tefillin, v'chein retzuos, also the straps. Straps are often replaced, depends on the quality of the straps and the climate, how much a person sweats and various things. But let's say a tefillin that'll last, let's say he gets a pair, the quality and also the climate, let's say it lasts 30 years. He may change the straps, half dozen times in that time. So also the straps that he buys, yiknem ish neman, he should purchase them from someone who's trustworthy. Because there's two things we have to worry about. So for those who just joined us, Siman Yud, chapter 10, we're in the middle of Aleph, number 1. There's two things. Number one is the leather has to be made for the sake of the tefillin, for the straps, has to be made for the sake of the mitzvah. If you just bought leather straps, they're no good. That's made the shema. And the other issue is we have to ensure that the leather is from a kosher animal. Right? Because everything that goes into making tefillin, mezuzahs, Retiree, everything in safras has to be mutter b'ficha, has to be kosher for the mouth. Now, that's more theoretical than practical. So for an example, you could use, people use, it could be something that's inedible, something you can't eat, but it's not a kosher problem. So for an example, you could use a metal tipped quill. So you can't eat metal, even if you need extra iron in your diet, right? It's still not good to eat metal, but it's not a kashrus issue. So we need to ensure that, so everything that goes into safras has to, the term is called mutter b'ficha, permissible for your mouth. It's kosher. So the animal has to be a kosher animal. It does not have to be shechted, by the way. It doesn't have to be a shechted animal. So even though you couldn't actually eat this particular animal, but it has to be a kosher species. Now, due to our many sins, in other words, due to the inadequacies within the Jewish communities, we have a situation where many people stumble because there's not proper oversight. There's no official system. So what happens? They purchase from people who offer a cheap price, and then it ends up the apostle. When it comes to tefillin mezuzahs, the general rule is, if it seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. It's not something we're going to learn about in this chapter, but for example, you actually have to write all tefillin mezuzahs, it has to be written. So there was people came with a scam, and they were making Torah scrolls that were screen printed. So they put down a stencil, and they smear the paint over the top. And you pick up the stencil, and you have the letters there. And because even with the stencil, it's not perfect. It's not like you printed it. It could look like a very high quality handwriting. But so instead of taking close to a year to make a Sefer Torah, they did the whole thing in under a month. So they're able to sell it very cheaply, and it just looked like a high quality Sefer Torah, right? But it was a scam, because actually it has to be written, and screen printing is not writing. So even things that look good, this is why it's important that whoever buy these things, they have to be two things, as we said. Number one, expert, and number two, a Yiras Shamayim. A Yiras Shamayim is almost surreal. They're not going to sell these things. But then he also has to know something, has to have an expertise. Otherwise, you can have, for example, you might have a person who runs a Judaica store, and he might very well be Yiras Shamayim, very sincere, very genuine. But unfortunately, since he doesn't know the laws of mezuzah, he could be conned into buying something that's not good. And although he's selling to you with the best of will, it's problematic. So, as long as he can get it from a certain place. So in Israel, the system is reasonably well. So again, I'll take that back. In Israel, they have the biggest con products because they sell on the markets, all kinds of things. But generally speaking, if you go to a store in Israel, they have various hechsherim. Right? In America, you don't really have hechsherim for the sofa. There is an organization that's trying to do that now. One of my sons, not Shlomo, who present to you, but the other son of the sofa, he's sat their test. Just not that he needs it. Baruch Hashem, he has plenty of customers, but he feels in concept there should be some oversight nationally. he supports the idea. But in Israel, they have, there's people certified by the Rabbanut, the Israeli central rabbinic authorities, and they have to sit certain tests. And there's Rav Landau, in the Bnei Brak, he has interesting on the Hechsher. One of the things in Rav Landau, it says that the Sefer was not listening to the radio or to music while he was writing this mezuzah. It's just anyway, it's one of the things. So he wasn't thinking about Trump or Biden when he was writing your mezuzah. He's hopefully thinking about the holiness of the mitzvah. So, but unfortunately, the situation is a lot of people get what they think is a good deal, and it's possible it's not good. The Chol Yiras Shamayim, therefore, anyone who really wants to do the mitzvah properly, Yitain Eliboy, he should take this to heart. And just like when he buys clothes and utensils and things he needs for his house, so how much, more so when it comes to things to do Hashem's mitzvahs, he should be generous with his money and get things that are for sure kosher. And you should make sure that they're finished nicely, that the actual boxes are painted properly, the straps are the way they're meant to be, and you should make sure that it has everything as it should be. Now, the next part, we'll do it anyway because we're trying to go through the whole book, God willing, but it's not really necessary today. We'll explain what the story is today. He says, a person should should smear. In other words, I guess the same way we polish our shoes, lahavdil. Don't want to compare our shoes to tefillin, but the same way a person polishes their shoes regularly, a person should polish lahavdil the straps of his tefillin. Should that they should be black and they should be nice. He says, you shouldn't smear it with the fat from animals, with the oil. Dag shnikra pishtron, from this fish oil. Sorry, it's called fishtron. Ki dag tami, because this is a non-kosher fish. I guess that was very common at the time, and so we shouldn't do that. Today, generally, if you're buying straps today, I'm not talking about some people have very old tefillin, maybe the family heirlooms, but if you're buying new straps today, there's two things. Number one is you'll find that some are black on both sides. We'll come to them next. But even the more traditional ones that are black on one side, it's almost like a thick layer. They've sealed it, and it can crack, and you'll notice the cracks, but it doesn't need oiling. With age or weather exposure, it'll crack eventually, but you don't need to oil. And they're probably the less quality ones we have today. In Israel, it was popular for quite a while, but it started to become popular, say, last 10, 15 years in America, to have black on black, that they actually dye the entire strap black, and then they put this shiny one on one side. So that way, if it cracks, it's still black. Personally, I recommend those. There's some people are hesitant to change what was done for many, many years, but pretty much all the major poskim, all the major halachic authorities have approved them. And that way, if it turns over, it's still black. It's I'm not saying if you have black on white, go out and change it, but at a time where it needs changing anyway, I would recommend getting a black on black.
That's what I did, and I love them, except On my shell yad, it's hard now to see if it's sitting right or not.
It's twisted.
Because I have to twist, and look, the being twisted doesn't help because it's black on that side too.
That's right.
Really reach around and whatever, but I really love them.
It works. It works, Baruch Hashem. Now, so, but in the old days where, again, people had today, the poorest person is like a rich person in those days, Baruch Hashem. I mean, I mentioned before, today, a person, even if they were in a studio apartment, well, that's what whole families lived in. And if you have running water and a flush bathroom and a few basic, like an oven, fridge, a vacuum cleaner, a few not even dishwasher, but a clothes washer, those kinds of things, or access to one. It's like having hundreds of servants in the past that to chop the wood and slap water from the wells. So Baruch Hashem, and but in times past, when it came to tefillin, it was very difficult for people, and the quality of leather they had access to was far lower quality, and that's what they have. Just since we're just mentioning the straps, I just mentioned there's two styles of straps. So there's ones that they designed to be as strong and sturdy as possible. They shouldn't crack. But that, of course, is going to be rather rough. So then, once at that starting point, they try and modify it to make it a little more supple. And they have those. Then they have there's this other school of thought that they take, like the finest Italian leather makers. It's the softest, supple leather. And then they modify it slightly to try and make it a little stronger. So either way, what they have today is really top, really top quality relative to the past. Now, the imnis kalkat tefillin, if part of the tefillin got damaged, a filurak mitzvahs, sorry, even if it's just a small part, or shenisko atfiroi, so the stitches, right? So where they sew it up, the stitches tore. So yasem miyad shalos chacham imhem ksherim. You have to immediately ask a rabbi who's or a sofer, someone who's not every rabbi studied safras, studied about they'll know generally, of course, but you should ask a question to someone who's has an expertise in this area to see if it's kosher. Right. This, of course, is one of the differences between the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the abridged code of Jewish law that we're learning, and the full Shulchan Aruch. So over here, we just say if there's a problem, ask a question. Right. In the full Shulchan Aruch, you're going to have dozens and dozens of issues, and then there'll be a ruling. It goes into much more depth. But over here, this is so we need to say if there's an issue, we need to ask. Just to mention, although it's don't want to get sidetracked into stories too often, but I had the privilege to do shimush. I guess we'll call it like a rabbinic apprenticeship, where you spend time with a experienced rabbi who gives halakhic rulings, and after you've learned the theory, and you see how they apply it in actual life. And I had the privilege to this with Rabbi Bosner. He's now in Monsey, but he was for a few years. I worked with him, and one time a boy, relative mitzvah boy, came up with his tefillin, and I think just started wearing tefillin, and he bumped it. There was barely a mark in the paint. It was really a nothing of a nothing of a nothing. And I think most people, even if they did not study about safras, would realize that it's absolute nothing, no issue at all. But he came over all worried, and he's come to Rav Osner, who is on the base din of the Vad Mishmer Stam. In other words, he, as well as all his expertise in other areas, when it comes to safras, the tefillin, mezuzahs, and Torah, he's like the person in America. and one of the people worldwide. So this boy comes up with nothing of a question, and he comes and he shows to him and he tells him that he bumped his tefillin, wants to know if it's kosher. And my thought, like if they would have shown it to me, at least at that stage of my life, I would have said, oh, it's fine, no problems. But I learned an important lesson in human relations that a rabbi needs to have. He took it and he examined it. He looked at it very carefully, and he made it like it was very serious. And he says to the boy, he says, they're kosher. Good job you showed it to me, though. And if you ever have a question, feel free to come again. And the boy was still nervous. He says, is it still mehuda? Meaning not just kosher, but it is, like A1, And he looks again, says, yes, they're very mehuda tefillin. And said to him again, but good job you asked me. And he was so, the boy walked away, feeling not only relieved, but, so it's not only knowing halacha, you have to know how to speak to people. And as much as I learned a tremendous amount in halacha from Boston, but I also learned, I won't say I learned how to be a mensch. I'm still working on it. I didn't get there yet, but I got partway there. I learned a lot on the journey to become a mensch. Anyway, now, so you should ask a question. Now, you particularly have to look at the corners. Now, again, today it's a little bit different. Maybe some people have heard the term. The boxes of tefillin can either be dakas or gases, which literally means small ones or big ones, not referring to the size of the tefillin. It's referring to the size of the animal that it came from. So, primarily due to poverty, all tefillin used to be made out of dakas, out of small animals, sheep or goat. And even then, it was often not one piece. They'd sort of, I'm not going to say glued, because they use like melted animal skin, but effectively glued. And it was multiple pieces. And it was thin skin. So it was very easy, a little bump can ruin the shape. And it has to be exactly square, or cubed, I should say. But each square has to be square. And the corners have to be squared off as well. So when this was written, it was very easy to do. Today, people generally, 85%, I just made that number up, but I'm going to say that's roughly correct. If not, it would be 90% of the tefillin made out of gases, the boxes. And that means it's made from a cow. It's much thicker. And most of them today are made from the neck of the cow, which is people have only been able to do that using hydraulic presses. It wasn't something that they were able to do in times past. It was too thick. Couldn't shape it properly. You may have heard Rabbi Zirkin. Oliver Shalom, he lived in multiple places, but the last however many years of life lived in Crown Heights. He was a groundbreaker in many areas. Right. So one of the things he was one of the first ones to start experimenting with using the thicker skin. And so he took, like a car jack, and he sort of pressed it with the car jack. His basement, his house, where he lived at the time, the actual house sat on steel beams, and he went in this basement, and he's there jacking it up against the steel beams to try and press it to flatten it. And then he realized it didn't flatten, but his house was lifting. So that experiment didn't quite go the way it planned. But so it's very thick skin, and Baruch Hashem, it's hard to damage. So the film can stay nice. Yes.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
On my tefillin, according to my rabbi, everything is kosher.
Okay.
But I don't know what you want to call it. It's a clear spray or something that's over the black itself. And that is peeling. The black is there, but the clear coat, if you want to call it that, parts of it are peeling. Does that make any difference?
Hey, you talking about the straps or the box?
No, on the straps itself.
Yeah. So if it's peeling off and and it's white underneath, then you probably need to get the straps replaced. If it's still black, then it's okay.
All right, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. Where do you live?
I live in South Florida.
So that's
There's no place to go. There's no place to go to look. You got a billion Chabad places. Bring them in.
Yeah.
I go to a Chabad.
Yeah, he said his rabbi said it was good. Yeah. Okay. So
I just wanted to verify something.
Yeah. And if it ever gets to a point where you need to get new straps, so my son who lives in Hollywood, he has you can go somewhere else, you go to my son, but he has a whole bunch of different widths and qualities and various things. He's very helpful.
Well, I thank you very much, Rabbi.
No problem. So you got to be particularly careful about the corners. And today, what they did, fill in on the arm, they put a plastic box, even because people are more likely to bump their arm into something than bump their head. People watch their heads a little bit better. Sorry, Isaac, do you have a question?
No, I just was going to say, my uncle, this is 50 years ago, Mechel, lived for years, Meir Shiurim at the end of his life. And once I went to visit him, and he put me, his Meir Shiurim apartment in the combination bedroom, living room, half a bathroom in the corner. But there was this huge machine on the side. And what he was doing is, besides exchanging money, at that time it was a business, he was also working on batim for tefillin. Mm-hmm. And he had one of these hydraulic presses, as you say. Huge thing that took up half the bedroom in terms of height, and it was just an incredible thing.
Yeah. It's an art. It's really it's tremendous skill. Tremendous skill to be able to make them. Okay, so we've got to be particularly careful to the corners, b'shel roish of the head, because they sometimes rub, and it's easy to the corners can become dented. And if solo, and then it's no good. The hench, as I said today, it's less of an issue. Some people try and get that tefillin checked every single year, right? Especially around this time of year. So really nowadays, there's no need to get checked every year, unless they were exposed to the elements or various things. One of the main reasons they checked it every year was not necessarily for the parchments; it was for the boxes, because we said they used much thinner skin because of their financial standing, and they sometimes were pieced together. So it was much easier for them to be damaged. Today, if you got the bottom are good, the boxes are, when I say the boxes, I don't mean the plastic storage, I mean the actual tefillin boxes. If they're looking good, probably only every few years you need to get it checked. It's not
in your car.
Yes, right.
If you leave them regularly in your car, people don't even realize it totally distorts everything.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I include that in being exposed to the elements.
Right.
I mean, if the car gets very hot or a very cold climate, also, and so because unless he tells you the parchments are on the way out, but generally speaking, if the parchment's good, the writing is good, then the boxes, the bottom that we have today, because they're so much better quality and so better made, they don't damage the same way. So opening and closing it is also not too often not too good. Anyway, and also it's very common that as tefillin age, Nifra katsas ma'oire elyon shel roish v'nisful. So the upper hide, again, because it's made of various pieces, but today it's one piece, peels off and it becomes no good. And we have to be very careful about all these things. Now, someone who cares, they're careful about the holiness of tefillin, they should treat them respectfully. And part of treating respectfully is not to speak about trivial things while wearing them. Now, there are some people who go out of their way not to say a word in tefillin. Okay, and I respect that. Personally, I think, when someone comes into shul and this the first time they're there, you can walk over and say Shalom Aleichem. Well, you see someone looking around, you can say, here's the siddur, here's where I keep the siddurim or something. I think that there is definitely a time and a place to that's appropriate to speak in tefillin. It's actually you're doing what Hashem wants. But to sit there, and talk about the upcoming Rugby World Cup, while wearing tefillin, that's perhaps not the most respectful thing to do. So someone who is careful. So it says Ma'arach Yom Muftach Shehu Ben Olam Habo. First of all, the days will be lengthened, and in other words, the life will be lengthened, and they'll also be guaranteed a place in the world to come. Shnamar, as it says, Hashem Aleihim. Says Hashem is upon them. Shnoisim Aleihim Hashem Tefillin. Since this person, well, this is in the brackets, just explain what it means Hashem is on them, means they're wearing the name of Hashem on them in the tefillin. Yichyu, those people live. And that's talking about its spiritual life. So all these things, this is my spiritual achalamaisi, vachiyiseini. So it says, they live, all these things with my spirit will live, and you give me life, and you sustain my life. Okay. Next point. Tefillin hu loshen pelila v'haychacha. The word tefillin itself, what does it mean? It means like a judgment. The haychacha, often they translate that to be rebuke, but it doesn't mean that. It's like it's almost like a proof. It's like a cross thing. In other words, if you show something clearly. So when it's used as rebuke, it means because you're showing someone they've made a mistake, and you're sort of pointing out the right way to go. So that's how it's most commonly used. We can even use like a proof to show something, but that's what the word tefillin means. And we'll just get the brackets. Get tefillin and eidus v'chacha shechina shara, because the tefillin are a proof and a testimony that the Shechina is on them. As the Pasuk says, that all the nations of the world are going to see the name of God is on you. What does that refer to? Our sages explained, it's referring to the tefillin of the head, which has a shin on it, which is one of the letters of Hashem's name. I'm going to say Shakai because we don't say Hashem's name unless we're davening, but instead of the K, it's actually a D, but that name, one of the names of Hashem. And therefore you have to be careful not to, even though we put talis over head often, not to completely cover the tefillin of the head. It should be visible. While tefillin on the arm, you could cover totally. Just to mention on this point again, without getting too sidetracked the stories, there's very interesting. So the Yom Kippur War, there were two people. They parked the tank, and they seemingly they were all in the all clear. That they weren't around any enemy, and they took the opportunity to daven. They put on their tefillin, and then they took a few steps forward, and they were overlooking a large area, and there was a whole Syrian battalion. These two guys, the guns are on the ground, maybe it's over their shoulder, and they're wearing the tefillin. There's like, I don't know the number, but a whole group And before they could say anything, one of the Syrian commander shouted something out, and they thought that's it. They thought they're being killed, God forbid. And so after shouting out, they all dropped their weapons and put their hands up. So they quickly, take their gun. Anyway, they lead them off to the area where they get or taken as prisoners. And when they're interrogated, they ask them, "Why did you surrender?" And he said, "Oh, they saw these two guys with these new American missile launchers with the wires hanging around." so they thought tefillin were, and so they didn't want to get blown up, so they surrendered. So this verse, the tefillin. Anyway, base number 2. Zman hanachasam b'boker. Now the time to put it on is in the morning. Now in reality, you have the entire day, the daylight hours. So why do we say the morning? Because like any mitzvah, if something's important to you, you don't push it off. The guy is coming to pick up his lotto he wants to take his lotto winning ticket in to pick it up. Doesn't say, "Oh, wait till the last day before it expires." He runs in, he's out there the next day before the office even opens, waiting for the door to open. Says me with all my experience of winning the lottery. Although we did win $4 the other week, so I'm doing well. Baruch Hashem. But anyway, so we want to do mitzvahs first thing. So we put it on in the morning. The Reb Levi Yitzchok used to be the first night Sukkos. He was so excited to shake Luven Esrog that he couldn't sleep the entire night. He was up the whole night waiting for the first moment to shake his Luven Esrog. And then after Sukkos, after Simchas Torah was over, he couldn't sleep that night either because Yontav, Chol Hamoed, went on with tefillin. He's waiting so excitedly to put on tefillin again the next day. And he couldn't sleep. Wasn't he deliberately stayed up? He just couldn't sleep out of excitement. The mitzvah to be able to put tefillin on again. Right? So ideally, that's how we should feel about mitzvahs. So what's the earliest time in the morning? That when it's light enough that someone who's an acquaintance, so not your best friend or your family member, maybe you can even tell it's pitch black. You can just tell by the sound of their walk or something, you're really familiar with them. So we don't mean that, but an acquaintance, someone who you know a little bit, but you don't know tremendously. And you can recognize them from a distance of 4 amas, approximately 6 feet. So it's in between dawn and sunrise. So those who have the halachic times, they get the app. It's called Mishiyaker, which means when you can recognize. So that's the earliest time. Achashlava is just talis. So after you put on the talis, so you put on your talis first. Maniach is tefillin, then you put on tefillin. But the makdimim is sitzes the tefillin, and the reason that we put on the talis first, mission the mitzvah sitzes, tadira yoisa, the mitzvah sitzes is more common. Shneheges bein b'chol bein b'shabbos v'yontav, because tefillin you're only putting on weekdays. Right, but talis you put on weekdays, Shabbos, Yontav, misfilin ein heges el b'chol, and tefillin you only put on weekdays. So the mitzvah of the talis of the sitzes happens more often than the mitzvah of tefillin. The kaimelon, and we have an established principle in halacha. Tadiv she'ena tadi. You got 2 mitzvahs, so both mitzvahs start at the same time. So you have 2 mitzvahs that you became obligated in both of them simultaneously. So which one comes first? You can't physically do both at once. So when you have one that's more common and one that's less common, at least compared to each other, the one that's more often takes priority. So that's what happens. So that's why I put on talis first. However, let's say you came across the tefillin first, even though they're still in their bag. So you put them on first. So some people mistakenly, what they do is when they come to shul, they unpack everything. They take out the tefillin, they take out the talis, they put everything on the table before they put anything on. And that becomes problematic because once you've taken your tefillin out, then you probably have to put them on first. So you should have those who keep in the same bag should have the tefillin deeper in the bag and the talis more towards the outside, and just take out the talis first and put that on, and then take out the tefillin. So why, if talis comes first, if you took out the tefillin by mistake first, why do you put them on first? Because you don't pass over mitzvahs. You shouldn't push it to the side. The chsiva says, "Mishmatem es mitzvahs." You should, literally means like you should guard, protect the mitzvahs. Kari vei es mitzvahs, mitzvahs sheba'al yadacha al timchatzenu, which means that when an opportunity presents itself to do a mitzvah, you shouldn't just push it off. So in this case, it plays out. If you've got the tefillin before the talis, you put it on first. But this is a idea that really goes across the board. You know, when you have the opportunity to do mitzvahs, you shouldn't push it off. I just give the Talmud gives a very contrast to two circumstances that show this principle. So when Ruth, our great, the great grandmother of King David, and who Mashiach's going to come out of, she married Boaz. She became pregnant that evening. Boaz passed away the next day. If he would have postponed the mitzvah of marrying Ruth, there would be no King David, no King Solomon. I mean, I guess Hashem would have organized Mashiach to come from somewhere else, but all these things wouldn't have happened. What's the opposite? King Shaul finally defeated Amalek, and they're all killed in battle. And they captured the king, and instead of executing him on that day, they decided, we'll wait till tomorrow, we'll give him like a royal execution. You know, he deserves something a little more fancy. That night, he impregnated a servant, and from him came Amalek. There came Haman from the Purim story. From that was descendant. So if they would have not postponed the mitzvah, that's it. Amalek would have been gone. No Haman, no Nazis, no. These things would have. So you see the importance of when a mitzvah, the opportunity presents itself, not to postpone it. Gimel, number 3. Ksiv, it says about the tefillin, v'haya la'ois al yodcha. There should be an ois, we're going to loosely translate as a sign, on your hand. And when I say loosely as a sign, I mean, it's not, it's a sign of God, now, Mechisiv Yodcha B'Hei, the fact that it says Yodcha with a Hey, which is a feminine version of the word, right? There's a masculine, we say Yodecha, it says Yodcha. Our sages teach us, meaning not that they made it up, it's from the oral Torah, it was given on Mount Sinai. What do we see? The Haino Yad Keha, it's the weaker hand. Zul Smoil Shaltasha V'Keha. So for majority of people, this is the left hand. Right? Majority of people are right-handed, and therefore their weaker hand is their left hand. And therefore, we put tefillin on the left hand. If someone happens to be left-handed, though, and therefore his left hand is his dominant and stronger hand, then he's going to put tefillin on his right hand, his weaker hand. But we put on the weaker hand. And we put it, we're talking about the box now, the actual bias itself. We put it on the upper part, where we put on is our bicep. It's not using the word bicep here, but that's what we put on the bicep, on the actual muscle, the mound there. Shema says, "Samtim is davore eila alavavchem." These words should be put on the heart. Now you're putting on your arm, not your heart. So that means they simak neged alev. Should be opposite the heart. So v'lachein yenicha shem of yata oisan matas hadaguf, and therefore we don't wear them straight on our bicep. It's turned slightly to the left. So when you're holding your arm naturally, it's opposite the heart, and so that's on the bicep. It's sorry. So when you let your hand hang down, to connect liboy, the film will be in a position where they're next to where the heart is. So that is the tefillin of the arm. That's where the box needs to be placed. Now, at that point, we can't have anything between the tefillin and the arm. So let's say someone had a cast there. There's really no point putting the tefillin on. The rest, the straps, so ideally, there shouldn't be anything between the strap and the flesh. But if there was, let's say a person had a cast on their forearm, let's say their wrist or something like that, then as long as the box, the bias actual, we're going to loosely call it box with contains the parchment, can go on the skin properly, and that's fine. So it's the box that needs to go in that place. But dixit tefillin shel roish bein einecha. Now about the tefillin of the head, it says bein einecha, between your eyes. Now you've of course never seen anyone wearing tefillin literally between their eyes. So kiblu Rabbeinu zichron lebrocha. So we have a tradition from Mount Sinai. Change those bein einecha mamish does not mean literally between our eyes. The keneged bein einecha, what it means is level with between our eyes. And really what it means is the area, it's the area between our hairline, or if you're like me, where your hairline used to be, right? It's been, if I put on my hairline, I'll be putting all the way back here, that's where the hairline was at once upon a time. Believe it or not, I once got sent home from school for having unruly hair. Yes, I was running late, didn't have time to, have a shower, just run straight to school. Anyway, so between the hairline, where the hairline used to be, and the place, it's sort of the top of the head, where on a baby, it's like with the skull joins up, it's a bit softer. Right? The place where you always got to tell the older siblings, don't touch the baby's head, it's so in between there. So I'll just point out that although in the ideal world, the nice big tefillin are more beautiful, but sometimes these kids have the bar mitzvah, they're small. And the nice big beautiful tefillin can actually be too big. Doesn't fit in the place. So, but anyway, the adults shouldn't be an issue. So it's between the hairline and that spot, but level between the eyes. So not over here in the hairline or, over here. It's level between the eyes. Dahainu. Shik said, Hatitoira Shilamata Loy Telamata Mokim Cyrus. So the one side tefillin shouldn't hang down lower than where the hairline was. And the back of the tefillin shouldn't be further back on the head than that place where the skull joins. You have to be very careful that it's put in the correct place. And if a person has it even a little bit on their forehead, lower than where the hair grows, the hairline, or it's in the right spot in the head, but to the side, he did not do the mitzvah. And therefore, the blessing was saying Hashem's name for no reason. So we have to be very careful, and sometimes the tefillin drops a little bit, and you have to be careful to adjust it. upon him, and the knot on the back of the head film goes where the spine goes into the bottom of the skull. So you'll have like a little indent, the bottom of the skull there, centered there. Liyate lekana lekan, and it shouldn't be on the side. It should be in at that indent. And it should be tightened to the head. In other words, you put the strap. Obviously, you don't want you don't want to make your film too tight. We're not trying to cut circulation and people's heads or arms fall off, God forbid. But it means they're not wobbling around. They're tight enough to hold their position. The next shabai is imavato rechavim. Kashe mukudokas karoy tzrichim zabzem oid. And if the bias, the box, and its base are too wide, it's hard to keep the tightness, and so you have to really pay attention to that. All right. Any questions? Sorry?
Yes, Rabbi. When we make a bracha, like even in the morning bracha, when we say Baruch Atah, and then that's in the second person, but then the end of the blessing is, for example, who made me as is his will, that's in the third person. And I just don't understand why that.
Okay, it's an excellent question. So for those who didn't hear this sound out a little bit, she says if we look at the bracha, we start off first person. Blessed are you, Hashem. You are speaking directly to Hashem, and then most brachas we switch into the third person.
Yes.
Who did this and this and this? No, it's like we're talking to someone else about Hashem.
Yeah.
So we could actually have a shiur just on that, but we'll just take a few quick points, and maybe one day we will have a shiur about that. That's so just a few quick ideas. Number one is that although we speak directly to Hashem because we want to have a personal connection, the reality is we can't comprehend how or what Hashem truly does. So we start off, Hashem, I'm talking to you, but then it switches third person because, we're praising how Hashem, let's say, for example, let's take one of the brachas, one of the morning blessings, who essentially allows people to see, okay, people sight.
Yes.
How did Hashem make a whole, so it goes into a third person because it's beyond their comprehension. That's one reason. Another reason is that we're alternating. We have two relationships with Hashem: Avinu, our Father, and Malkeinu, our King. So our Father, that's a personal relationship. That's Baruch Hashem. But once we start saying Melech HaOlam, King of the universe, then we switch into a king. We speak about in third person. We're not impudent enough. So, it's not appropriate to speak directly to the great king. So in each bracha we have both relationships reflected. So they're two of the ideas, but really it's Kabbalistically there's an idea that it's going to take more than the time that we have here. But I'm glad you picked it up and glad you mentioned it. It's a very interesting topic in itself. But that's the basic reasons.
Well, I've seen it also when we
So you broke up. You broke up what you just said.
I said I've seen it also in other barachot, like when we're making berkat.
All brachas. Once we say Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, we switch into third person.
Nice.
Sometimes you do it like in we can even do without saying that, but that's because it's Avinu Malkeinu. That's one of the reasons. That's how it goes. Okay, so we shall wish everyone a wonderful week. And even though it's early, we'll say good Shabbos because I won't see you till next Sunday. You never know; maybe we'll have a chance to learn earlier. And everyone should be healthy, should learn well, grow, And we'll see you next week, if not sooner, God willing.
Thank
you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Take care.